Okay, so we're diving deep today, and this one is fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at Aline Gavriliuk's book, Social Cognition, specifically
Uh,
Chapter 11, Emotion and Cognition, Moral Dilemmas.
yes. Terror management theory and the salience of death. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. It is quite a mouthful. But it's such an interesting chapter. You had flagged this one for us to discuss, and I'm excited to dig into it.
Oh, me too. It's a really, really interesting chapter. A lot of interesting things to talk about.
Yeah. Let's give everybody a little bit of a roadmap here. We're going to be looking at how our emotions color our responses to moral dilemmas. So, those situations where it's really tough to decide what the right thing to do is, right?
Right.
And then, of course, the big one, the awareness of death, which I know is a big part of this chapter, and how that shapes our thoughts and behaviors.
Yes, exactly. How we deal with that knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And terror management theory, which
Me
is a
too.
big part of this. And so we'll kind of unpack all of this in a way that I think is going to be relatable and insightful, but also maybe a little bit surprising to some people.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's start with those moral dilemmas. So
Okay.
what is a moral dilemma in psychology?
Well, it's basically situations where we're presented with two conflicting options, and they both have some kind of moral justification. So it's not like one option is clearly good and one option is clearly bad.
Yeah. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
this is very well defined by Christensen and Gamila.
Okay.
They wrote about this in 2012,
Okay.
and they basically define moral dilemmas in these terms.
Gotcha. And the chapter uses the classic example of the trolley dilemma to kind of illustrate this.
Yes, absolutely. This is the most common example used in this kind of research.
Yeah.
And the trolley dilemma, it's basically this thought experiment. So you have a runaway trolley.
Right. Barreling down the tracks.
Mm.
And there are 5 people tied to the tracks. And there's nothing they can do.
Right. Classic.
Classic. And then there's you. And you can flip a switch. And if you flip the switch, the trolley will go on a different track.
Right.
But there's one person tied to that track.
Okay.
And so the question is, do you flip the switch? Do you kill one person to save 5?
Right. Like, is it okay to sacrifice one life to save 5?
Exactly.
Right.
And most people will say yes in that situation.
Right. It feels like a math problem almost, right?
Exactly. Very cold, very calculated. But then things get a little more interesting when we look at another version of the trolley problem.
Right. Okay.
It's called the footbridge dilemma. So it's basically the same setup. There's a runaway trolley. There are 5 people tied to the track. But this time, you're standing on a footbridge over the tracks.
Okay.
And next to you is a very large person.
Okay.
And the only way to stop the trolley is to push this person off the bridge onto the tracks.
Oh, wow. Their body will stop the trolley.
Okay, so now it's getting personal.
Exactly. It's no longer just flipping a switch.
Right. You're physically involved.
Exactly. You're physically involved in causing someone's death.
Right.
And this was studied by Jay Green back in 2001. And what they found is that people are far less likely to push the person off the bridge, even though the outcome is the same. You're still saving 5 lives.
Right. But it's so interesting. It's like even if in the footbridge dilemma, people say, yes, I'll push the person, the amount of time it takes them to come to that decision is way longer than in the switch dilemma.
Exactly. And this is because there's this emotional component.
Right.
Right? In the footbridge dilemma, you're actually causing someone's death.
Right. You're not just witnessing it.
Exactly.
You're actively.
You're part of it.
Yeah.
And this triggers all these negative emotions: empathy, guilt, disgust.
And there's actually fMRI evidence, brain scan evidence showing that in these personal moral dilemmas, there's a lot more activity in the emotional centers of the brain.
Exactly. So it's not just a philosophical difference. It's actually a neurological difference.
Yeah. It's like our brains are wired to have a really strong aversion to that kind of direct harm.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
like we're okay with sacrificing 1 to save 5 in the abstract, but when it gets down to actually doing it, our emotions really kick in.
Exactly.
And this kind of led to this model called the dual model of moral decision making.
Yeah.
Which basically says that we have these two systems, right? We
Yeah.
have the rational calculating system that's like, okay, well, 1 life versus 5 lives, very Spock-like.
Yes, exactly.
And then we have this emotional system that's much more gut level, instinctual, and that often overrides that rational calculation, especially when there's that personal involvement.
Yes, and this model was proposed by Green et al. In 2004.
Okay.
And they further elaborated on this model in later papers in 2009 and 2014.
Okay.
So it's a very well supported model.
Yeah. So it's not just about, the numbers, right? It's about how we feel about the situation.
Yeah.
And how personally involved we are.
Exactly.
And the chapter goes on to talk about this study by Gray and Wegner.
Yes.
Which is from 2009.
Yes.
And this study is fascinating because it shows how even just the way we perceive people can be influenced by who they're associated with.
Exactly.
So they had this character, David, who's just this, neutral teacher.
He's
right?
just a regular guy.
Just a regular guy. And they paired him with either Alex, who's this heroic pilot, decorated war hero, saves lives.
Yeah.
Or they paired him with Alex, who's a suffering orphan, been through a lot.
Very different images.
Yeah, very different images. And what they found is that when David was paired with the heroic pilot, he was seen as less agentic, less capable.
Yes. Less able to make things happen.
Yeah, and even less sensitive to pain. Like somehow the heroic pilot made David seem weaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we're constantly comparing.
Yeah.
And when you compare a regular guy to a hero, the regular guy will always seem less capable.
Right. But then when David was paired with the suffering orphan, suddenly he was seen as more agentic.
Yes. Stronger, more able to endure pain.
Yeah. It's like our perception of him completely shifted based on who he was associated with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this shows how our moral judgments are not just based on the person themselves, but also on the context.
Right. It's not just about individual traits in isolation. It's about the whole relational landscape, the dynamics.
Exactly. And this has to do with this concept of implicit semantics, which basically means that we're constantly making these associations, these connections, without even realizing it.
So it's like our brains are constantly creating these narratives in the background.
Yeah.
And those narratives shape how we see the world.
Exactly. And these narratives are based on our experiences, our culture, our beliefs.
Right.
All these things that we're not even aware of.
And these narratives, they have emotions attached to them, right?
Yes, absolutely. Emotions are a big part of these narratives.
So it's not just like, oh, I see this person and I logically deduce that they're this kind of person.
Right.
It's like I see this person and I have a feeling about them.
Exactly. And that feeling comes from all these implicit associations.
Yeah. Wow. So it's really complex, right? This whole idea of moral judgment.
It is. It is very complex.
It's not just about, black and white, right and wrong. It's about all these factors that we might not even be aware of. Okay. So the chapter then moves on to this question of, can we become more rational in our decision making?
Yeah.
And this is where Albert Ellis and his rational emotive behavioral theory, REBT, comes in.
Yes, REBT. This is a very, very influential theory in psychotherapy.
Okay.
And it's all about understanding how our thoughts influence our emotions.
Okay.
So the basic premise is that our emotional problems don't come from the events themselves,
Right.
but from our beliefs about those events.
Right. So it's not the thing that happens to you, it's how you think about it.
Exactly. And Ellis, he has this very famous ABC model.
Right.
A stands for activating event. So that's the thing that happens.
Okay.
B stands for beliefs. So that's how we think about the event.
Okay.
And C stands for consequences. So that's our emotional and behavioral response.
Gotcha. So A leads to B and then B leads to C.
Exactly. And the key here is B.
Right. The beliefs.
The beliefs. Because if we have irrational beliefs, then we're going to have negative emotional consequences.
Right. So what's an irrational belief?
Well, irrational beliefs are beliefs that are not supported by evidence.
Okay.
They're often rigid, inflexible.
Okay.
They're based on faulty logic.
Okay.
And they lead to negative emotions.
Okay. Like what?
Well, for example, if you believe that you must be perfect in everything you do.
Okay. Yeah. I know that one.
Yeah. That's an irrational belief because it's impossible to be perfect.
Right.
And it's going to lead to a lot of anxiety and frustration.
Right. Because you're always going to be falling short.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So then what's a rational belief?
Well, rational beliefs are beliefs that are supported by evidence.
Okay.
They're flexible.
Yeah.
They're based on logic and reason.
Okay.
And they lead to more positive emotions.
Gotcha. So like instead of I must be perfect, it's I'm going to try my best and learn from my mistakes.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a much more rational belief because it's more realistic.
Right.
And it's not going to lead to so much anxiety and frustration.
Right, right, because it allows for imperfection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So RABT is all about identifying those irrational beliefs and challenging them.
Yes, exactly.
And replacing them with rational beliefs.
Exactly.
And that can lead to more functional emotion.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like instead of, crippling anxiety, you might feel, healthy concern.
Exactly. Or sadness instead of depression.
Right.
Preoccupation instead of anger.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're trying to eliminate emotions,
Right.
but we're trying to have more healthy emotions.
Right. Functional emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the chapter talks about how Oriki has been used in a lot of different settings.
Oh, yes.
Education, clinical therapy. It's a pretty versatile approach.
Absolutely. It can be applied to a wide range of problems.
Right.
From anxiety and depression to anger management to relationship problems. Yeah.
There's a lot of research on RABT. Some of the key figures in RABT research: Dobson in 2009, Kendall and Holland in 2013, Beck, Davis, and Freeman in 2015, Sundell in 2017, Erpert et al. In 2010.
Wow. Okay. A lot of people working on this.
Yeah, a lot of research.
Yeah. Okay. So RBT, gives us these tools to try to manage our emotions, manage our thinking.
Yeah.
But the chapter then goes on to talk about this idea of, we have these two systems in our brain, the dual model of information processing.
Yes, System 1 and System 2.
Right, System 1 and System 2.
This was proposed by Barg in 1984,
Okay.
And later elaborated on by Kahneman in 2011. And Strack-Deutsch in 2015.
Okay.
So System 1, this is our fast automatic emotional system.
Right.
It's the system that we use for quick decisions.
Right. Like fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very good at detecting threats.
And responding to them quickly.
Yeah.
But it's not very good at thinking things through carefully.
Right. It's not very logical.
Exactly. It's very emotional.
It's like our gut reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Taleb, in his book, The Black Swan, he talks about how emotions are often System 1's way of telling us to pay attention to something.
Yeah.
That there's something important here.
Right.
So it's not that emotions are bad,
right,
but they're not always accurate.
Right. They're not always based on logic or complete information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this can lead to errors.
Right.
System 1 is prone to errors.
Oh.
For example, there's this concept called attribution substitution.
Okay.
Which was proposed by Kahneman and Frederick in 2005.
Okay.
And basically what it means is that when we're faced with a difficult question, a question that requires a lot of cognitive effort, System 1 will often substitute that question with an easier question, a question that it can answer quickly.
Right. So it's like taking a shortcut.
Exactly. It's a shortcut.
Yeah.
But it's a shortcut that can lead to wrong answers.
Yeah. It's like when you're trying to figure out how likely something is to happen, and instead of, actually looking at the statistics and the data, you just go with your gut feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this can lead to all sorts of biases, stereotypes, prejudices, all these things.
Yeah.
Because we're not actually thinking things through carefully.
Right. We're just going with our gut.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other system 2, that's the one that's more deliberative, more analytical.
Yes,
exactly. More conscious.
Yes.
But that takes effort.
It does. It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes energy.
And we don't always have those resources.
Exactly.
So we often default to System 1.
Exactly. Especially when we're under stress.
Right.
When we're tired.
Yeah.
When we're under time pressure.
Yeah. And that, there's individual differences too, right? Like some people are just more prone to using one system over the other.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's like some people are just naturally more intuitive.
Yeah.
And some people are just naturally more analytical.
Exactly. And this was studied by Kiersmaker et al. in 2020.
Okay.
And also by Diederich and Trueblood in 2018.
Okay.
And they found that there's actually a spectrum.
Right.
So it's not like you're either one or the other,
Right.
but you can be somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And this is called cognitive style.
Okay.
So your cognitive style is basically your preferred way of processing information.
Gotcha.
And some people are more intuitive.
Right.
Some people are more analytical.
Yeah. And then, the chapter talks about this concept of affective heuristics.
Yes.
Which is basically, how our emotions influence our decisions.
Exactly.
So instead of, thinking things through carefully, we just go with how we feel.
Exactly. And this was proposed by Lerner, Lee, Valdesolo, and Kassam in 2015.
Okay.
And Kahneman also talked about this in 2012.
Okay.
And basically what it means is that our emotions can act as shortcuts.
Right.
They can help us make decisions quickly.
Yeah.
But they can also lead to biases.
Right, because they're not always accurate.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Taylor makes this point about how sensationalism and strong emotions can really distort our assessments of probability.
Exactly. So, if something is very emotionally salient, if it's very vivid, if it's very scary,
Right.
We're more likely to overestimate the probability of it happening, even if it's actually very unlikely.
Yeah. Like the classic example of, people are more afraid of flying than driving, even though driving is statistically much more dangerous.
Exactly. But plane crashes are so much more vivid.
Right.
They're so much more emotionally salient.
Yeah. They're in the news more.
Exact.
Yeah. So it's like our emotions are hijacking our rational thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got, moral dilemmas. We've got REBT. We've got system 1 and system 2. We've got effective heuristics. And all of this kind of leads up to this really interesting and kind of profound theory, terror management theory.
Yes. TMT.
TMT.
This was developed by Greenberg, Pizinski, and Solomon back in 1986.
Okay.
And it's based on the work of Ernest Becker.
Right.
Particularly his book, The Denial of Death, which was published in 1973.
Right.
And Becker's basic premise is that humans are unique in the animal kingdom in that we are aware of our own mortality.
Right. We know we're going to die.
We know we're going to die. And this knowledge is terrifying.
Yeah. It's kind of a downer.
It is. It is a downer.
Yeah.
And Becker argued that this fear of death is the root of all our anxieties.
Wow.
It's the mother of all fears.
Okay.
And we spend our lives trying to manage this fear.
Right.
Trying to deny it, to suppress it, to escape from it.
And how do we do that?
Well, according to TMT, we do this by creating these cultural worldviews.
Okay.
These systems of meaning and value.
Okay.
That give us a sense of order and purpose.
Okay.
And that also give us a sense of symbolic immortality.
Okay. Symbolic immortality. So even though I know I'm going to die, my legacy will live on.
Exactly. Or my soul will live on.
Right.
Or my work will live on.
Or my memes will live on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we create these systems of meaning that help us to cope with the terror of death.
Right. It's like a buffer against the void.
Exactly. And there's a lot of research that supports TMT. Pizinski, Greenberg, and Solomon, they've been doing research on this for decades.
Okay.
And they've found that when people are reminded of their own mortality,
Okay.
They become more likely to defend their cultural worldviews.
Right.
They become more prejudiced against people who don't share their worldviews.
Okay.
They become more likely to support aggressive leaders.
Okay. So when we're feeling threatened, we cling even more tightly to our beliefs.
Exactly. And this is really important to understand because it can explain a lot of human behavior.
Yeah.
Why do we have wars?
Right.
Why do we have prejudice?
Why do we have all these conflicts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And TMT can help us to understand these things because it shows that a lot of these conflicts are ultimately about death.
Okay.
About our fear of death.
Right. So even though we might not be consciously thinking about it, this underlying fear is driving a lot of our behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the chapter talks about this first experiment by Pizinski, Greenberg, and Solomon.
Yes.
Where they had these judges, right?
Yes.
And they manipulated their their death salience?
Yes. So they basically had two groups of judges.
Yeah.
And one group, they had them think about their own death.
Okay.
They had them write about it.
Okay.
And the other group, they had them think about something neutral.
Right.
Like what they had for dinner.
Right.
And then after that, they gave them all a case to judge.
Okay.
It was a prostitution case.
Okay.
And they found that the judges who had been reminded of their own death were much more likely to give a harsher sentence.
Wow. Okay.
So just thinking about death
yeah.
Made them more punitive.
Right. It's like they were trying to reinforce the moral order.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this has been replicated in many other studies.
Okay.
Landau et al. In 2004, Cohen et al. In 2005, Vail et al. In 2010, Wise et al. In 2012, Cohen et al. Again in 2013 and 2017, Aaronwood and Cox in 2020.
Wow. Okay. So a lot of research showing this connection between death salience and our behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the chapter talks about how TMT can help us understand a lot of things in the real world.
Yes.
Like religion.
Yes.
Patriotism.
Yes.
Immigration.
Yes.
Ideologies.
Yes.
All these things that give us a sense of meaning and purpose.
Exactly. And that help us to cope with the fear of death.
Right.
And the chapter focuses specifically on the political implications of TMT.
Okay.
And how this theory can help us to understand political behavior.
Right, like why people vote for certain candidates.
Exactly.
Right.
And the chapter gives the example of George W. Bush's increased popularity after 9/11.
Right.
And how he used this rhetoric of a crusade against evil.
Right.
And Cohen et al. In 2005, they did a study showing that people who were reminded of their own mortality were more likely to support Bush.
Okay.
So this fear of death can make people more likely to follow these charismatic leaders.
These sort of strongman figures.
Exactly.
Right.
And then the chapter also talks about Donald Trump's campaign messages in 2017.
Yeah.
And how he also used this rhetoric of fear and threat.
Right. Making America great again.
Exactly. Making America great again.
Yeah.
And Cohen et al. In 2017, they did a study showing that people who were reminded of their own mortality were more likely to support Trump.
Okay.
So this is a very, very powerful phenomenon.
Yeah. It's kind of scary. Yeah.
It is scary.
Because it shows how easily we can be manipulated.
Exactly. And the chapter ends with this really chilling thought.
Okay.
And it goes back to Becker's work.
Okay.
And Becker argued that this fear of death can also drive us to do evil things.
Right. Because if anything that threatens our worldview is seen as a threat to our immortality,
Exactly.
then we're going to want to eliminate that threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And